On the steep slopes of towering mountains lived a small, orphaned shepherd named Salem. Salem owned nothing in the world except a tiny hut, a staff he had inherited from his father, and a single sheep as white as snow. That sheep was his entire family and his only companion. He named her Najma, for the gray spot in the center of her forehead that resembled a star. Najma was not just any sheep to Salem. She was the comfort to his loneliness amid the vast green pastures. He would speak to her, and she would respond with a soft bleat, as if she understood him. He shared with her the little bread he had, and on cold nights, he would sleep beside her, drawing warmth and safety from her wool. Their life was peaceful and simple. Every morning, Salem would lead Najma to the hills to graze on the fresh green grass, while he sat beneath the shade of an ancient olive tree, playing a mournful tune on his flute. Najma would lift her head and gaze at him with her gentle eyes. But this fragile peace was threatened by an ancient danger lurking in the high mountains. The elder shepherds whispered about a massive gray wolf, a ghostly figure that appeared at dusk. Clever and cunning, it stole sheep from flocks without anyone noticing. Salem heard their tales and his heart trembled with fear for Najma. He doubled his vigilance, never letting her out of his sight for a moment. One autumn afternoon, as Salem prepared to return to the village, dark clouds suddenly gathered. Fierce winds blew, and heavy rain began to pour. Salem hurried along the path, but the valley he had to cross was flooded, and the mud became thick and sticky, hindering their movement. At a moment when Salem was struggling to free his foot from a deep patch of mud, he caught a glimpse from the corner of his eye, a gray shadow darting like lightning among the rocks. Before he could shout or raise his staff, the wolf pounced on Najma. The attack was silent and precise. One leap, a strong bite to her neck, and it was over. Salem tried to rush toward them but stumbled and fell into the mud. All he could see were the wolf's yellow eyes, staring coldly at him for a moment before the beast disappeared into the darkness, dragging Najma's lifeless body behind it. When the rain stopped, only Salem remained in the valley, alone with the mud and a silence heavier than the mountains themselves. He crawled to where his friend had fallen but found only a patch of blood mingled with the rainwater. In that moment, Salem's deep sorrow transformed into a volcano of rage and hatred. No longer a frightened child, he became a man stripped of everything, wanting only one thing from the world: revenge. He returned to the village with a face as dark as a stormy night. The villagers saw him and knew what had happened. They pitied him. An old wise woman named Haja Safia came to comfort him, saying, "This is God's will, my son. The wolf takes and God gives. Be patient, and God will compensate you with good." But Salem gently pushed her hand away and said, "Yes, God is great, Haja Safia, but I cannot sit idly by. I will trust in God and take my right with my own hands." He entered his hut, lit his lamp, and took out an old dagger that had belonged to his father from beneath his bed. He spent the entire night sharpening it on a whetstone. The sound of metal scraping against stone was the sound of his grinding teeth. At the first light of dawn, he donned his worn-out sandals, placed the dagger in his belt, grabbed his staff and some water, and left without looking back. He went to the valley and began tracking the wolf's footprints left in the mud. The trail led him far from the familiar pastures, climbing toward the rugged rocky peaks where no shepherd dared to go. Salem walked on, his heart boiling with hatred. Whenever fatigue overcame him, he recalled Najma's gentle eyes, renewing his resolve. The fire of revenge blazed anew in his chest. He spent the whole day climbing sharp rocks and crossing narrow passes. The sun was beginning to set when he reached a desolate area filled with dark caves resembling gaping mouths. He saw the wolf's tracks heading straight toward the largest and darkest of these caves. Salem stood before the cave's mouth, which looked like the jaws of a mythical beast waiting to swallow him. He trembled, not from cold, but from a mixture of fear and hatred. He had found his enemy's den. Drawing his gleaming dagger, he stepped into the darkness, ready to kill or be killed. Yet, he did not know that the wisdom he would learn in this dark lair would be more painful and powerful than any revenge he had dreamed of. Salem crept into the dark cave, dagger shining with a dull gleam in his hand. All his senses were alert, and his heart pounded fiercely, prepared to face the monster who had stolen everything from him. The scent of damp earth and fur filled the air as he ventured deeper into the rocky passage, guided by faint light filtering through a crack in the cave's ceiling. Suddenly, he heard a soft whimper, not a howl or a visitor's call, but a faint sound like a crying infant. Cautiously, curiosity led him toward the source. He reached a small chamber in the heart of the cave, and what he saw there froze the blood in his veins, not from fear, but from surprise. In a corner of the chamber were 4 tiny wolf pups. They were not little monsters, but small balls of gray fur, trembling and huddling together, emitting that heartbreaking soft whimper. Their eyes had barely opened, and they looked weak and hungry. Salem stood stunned. He had come to kill, to avenge. How could he harm these innocent little creatures? For the first time since Najma's death, the fire of revenge flickered in his chest, but he quickly remembered his enemy. Their mother, the deadly she-wolf, must be nearby. With great caution, he examined the rest of the dark chamber. In the farthest corner, he saw a large gray mass lying motionless. It was her, the wolf who had taken his friend from him. He raised his dagger and stepped forward slowly, his heart filling again with hatred. But as he drew closer, he noticed something strange. The wolf did not move but let out a muffled whine, similar to the cries of her pups. When he was just a few steps away, he saw the terrible truth in full. It was not a wolf but the she-wolf, the mother of the pups, lying on her side, breathing with difficulty. Her hind leg was trapped in an old rusty metal trap, one of those merciless snares set by hunters. The trap had bitten deep into her flesh, and dried blood surrounded it. Near her lay the remains of his sheep, Najma, but he noticed the she-wolf had eaten only a little, as if she had brought the meat merely to feed her pups, who were too young to hunt. At that moment, Salem understood everything. This wounded, desperate mother, trapped in her snare, was using the last of her strength to hunt an easy prey, not for herself, but for her starving young. Najma's death had not been an act of evil, but an act of desperate motherhood. Salem stood over her, dagger trembling in his hand. This was his chance. Revenge was easy and within reach. One strike could end his enemy's life. He looked into her yellow eyes and found no ferocity, only deep pain and silent pleading. Then he looked at the tiny pups crawling weakly toward their wounded mother. He remembered his own loneliness after losing his parents and his love for Najma. What difference was there between his love for his sheep and this she-wolf's love for her pups? If he killed her, he would create 4 orphans just like himself. He would condemn them to death by starvation and become the very monster he had come to destroy. In that moment, Salem lost a battle in his heart more fierce than any knife fight, a battle between the fire of revenge and the water of mercy. He looked at the dagger in his hand, then at the wounded she-wolf. Would he quench his pain with a greater pain? Heal his wound by inflicting a deeper one on another soul? Slowly, with a trembling hand, Salem lowered the dagger. The flame of revenge died in his heart, replaced by something warmer and more painful, compassion. He no longer saw his enemy as a killer, but as a suffering mother. He no longer wished to kill her, but felt a strange and powerful urge to help. Salem made his decision. He sheathed his dagger, not because he was a coward, but because he was brave enough to choose mercy over revenge. He knelt slowly so as not to frighten the wounded she-wolf and began examining the metal trap clamped onto her leg. It was old and strong, impossible to open with bare hands. Salem thought quickly. He remembered seeing the remains of an old pine tree struck by lightning on his way to the cave, its strong branches scattered around. He left the cave and soon returned dragging a sturdy branch. Approaching the she-wolf quietly, he whispered soothing words as if speaking to his sheep, Najma. The she-wolf watched him with wary eyes and bared her teeth, but she was too weak to move. Salem placed the end of the branch into the jaws of the metal trap and used it as a lever, pressing with all his might. The she-wolf groaned in pain as the trap shifted, but Salem kept pushing, veins bulging with effort. Finally, he heard a metallic snap, the trap's jaws opened, freeing her leg. Though freed, the she-wolf was gravely wounded. Salem was not done yet. He went outside the cave again and gathered some plantain leaves, which he knew from his father could stop bleeding and cleanse wounds. He chewed the leaves to soften them, then gently applied them to the she-wolf's injury. Having done all he could, Salem slowly moved back to the cave entrance and sat watching. He made no move to harm the pups and showed no aggression. He demonstrated to the mother wolf that he only wished to help. Hours passed with Salem motionless in his place. The she-wolf licked her wound and glanced at him occasionally with long, mysterious looks. Then, in a scene Salem had never dreamed of, the wounded mother slowly crawled toward her pups and nursed them. She then nudged a small piece of Najma's meat toward Salem, as if returning a favor and inviting him to share her food. At that moment, tears streamed down Salem's face. Not tears of sorrow for Najma, but tears of a different kind. He had understood the wisdom that had brought him to this place. He realized that the cycle of life and death was greater than his personal grief, and that revenge only breeds more pain and orphanhood, just to complete its own cycle. But mercy is the only language all creatures understand, and it alone can break the circle of hatred. Salem did not eat the meat. Instead, he rose quietly, took out the last piece of bread he had, and placed it at the cave's entrance. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind his enemy who now owed him her life, and a wisdom he would never forget. The next day, Salem returned to the village, not as the angry boy who had left, but as a calm young man who had aged 20 years in 2 days. He went to Haja Safia and told her everything that had happened. The wise old woman smiled and said, "You lost a sheep, my son, but you found your heart, and that is the true treasure." From that day on, Salem was no longer just a shepherd, but the guardian of the mountain. He tended the few sheep he bought after working hard and cared for the balance of nature. He knew where hunters set traps and destroyed them, healed injured animals he found, and guided lost lambs back to their mothers. He never saw the gray she-wolf and her pups up close again, but sometimes, when he was in the high pastures, he glimpsed 3 young wolves sitting silently on a rocky peak, watching over his flock as if guarding it from any other danger. The shepherds in the village said that Salem's flock was the only one the wolves never dared approach. And so, Salem learned that true courage is not in raising a weapon for revenge, but in lowering it to offer mercy. The greatest wisdom a person can learn is to see themselves in the eyes of their enemy and realize that the pain is the same. That we are all, humans and animals alike, simply seeking safety and life. And here our story ends, but tales with the storyteller never truly end. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you take from this story? Where are you from? And if you liked the tale, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can live every new story with us.